This is just about a 40-year-old wing rib for a GN-1 slash Pietenpol hybrid air camper. This particular rib was built by the late Bob Rowe. He built, three GN-1 Pietenpol hybrids plus a biplane hybrid. He took some of the best ideas from both airplanes and developed it into a biplane that he called the Rowe Sport. It differs from a Pietenpol rib in that it uses a plywood nose block instead of steam bending the cap strips around that curve. Plus, it uses 1/4-inch square cap strips, verticals and diagonals. Now I forget which airplane, which Pietenpol hybrid this one came from. I think, but don't get me to lying. I was so involved with all of the stuff going on around here. I just didn't have time to keep count, but I believe this was the first one. It was the steel tube fuselage version. He built two steel tube fuselage versions, or versions, and then a complete wooden fuselage version of the airplane. Now Bob built these ribs a little bit heavy in that he used birch for the nose block and birch 1/16 plywood for the gussets. And he told me later on that he had wished that he had have used mahogany because it would have been slightly lighter. Now, in the overall scheme of things, what are we talking about overall lighter? Maybe a half a pound overall, birch versus mahogany. But on my airplane, I used spruce cap strips and mahogany nose block and mahogany gussets. Now that is the rib jig from the Pietenpol GN-1 hybrid that I built. You can see that a mahogany nose block is still in the jig. Now my rib differed from Bob Rowe's in that it was slightly thicker, the airfoil was slightly thicker, and a few other little odds and ends that really don't matter to this presentation. Now, the GN-1 design used solid 3/4-inch spruce spars instead of the 1-inch thick routed spars that the Pietenpol used. As a matter of fact, both front and rear spars were 3/4-inch solid spruce. So what am I doing, you might be asking yourself? Well, one of my subscribers of my YouTube channel was asking a question on one of the forums on Facebook, and I guess as everybody knows, you get into one of those type club forum type things on Facebook, and you run into people, everybody has a different idea on how to do things. And then you have just endless arguments about this, that, and the other thing. If it's not glue, it's welding, Teague versus oxyacetylene, just senseless arguments that go on and on and on forever. grain of gussets, and good Lord, just one thing after another. Anyway, one of my subscribers was just, he was following one of the ceaseless, endless arguments that had been going on for days about GN-1s versus Pietenpol, and listen, that controversy has been going on since 1978 that I know of. Same argument. You got the Pietenpol purists, you got the GN-1 fellas, that like their airplanes. To tell you the truth, I love them both. I've flown them both. They both fly great. I like anything Pietenpol or semi-Pietenpol. But he was so confused, his head was swimming, and we got to chatting on private messages. And so he was asking about using plywood nose blocks. Well, let me tell you, plywood nose blocks have been used in GN-1 air campers since the late 70s that I know of. And Bob Rowe told me before he died, and Ned Kinsinger backed it up, he was a Pietenpol builder down here, that people had been using plywood nose blocks going back to the 60s and maybe even the early 50s, but I'm not going to go out on a limb there. I do know back during the 60s they were using them. The argument goes, and there's a little bit of truth to both sides, but of the argument, but like every argument, there's your story, his story, and then the truth of the story, or the middle ground of the story, if you will. The problem with using plywood nose blocks on the Pietenpol air camper is you're using 1/2-inch wide cap strips. Now, if you go in here and use a 1/2-inch wide plywood nose block, it may start getting a little bit heavy. But you can get around that by cutting out your 1/4-inch plywood nose blocks, gluing in 1/8-inch doublers on either side, say up to here, on either side, so that when you cut your inlet for your cap strips, it'll fit right in, and your gussets will nail in and everything will be hunky-dory, and you've got a half-inch wide cap strip with a 1/4-inch wide nose block, and it'll work like that. But people like Bob Rowe and Ned Kinsinger said, well, the heck with that, we're just going to go the GN-1 air camper route and use 1/4-inch cap strips, just like hundreds of other airplanes have done, and 1/4-inch nose blocks. Now, back in those days, we cut the nose blocks out on a we called them a jigsaw. They're scroll saws. And buddy, it was hard to really maintain a really even nose block. It could be done. I mean, you hook all the blocks together and then sand them down just like you do on model airplane ribs. But later on, I developed my own router type system for cutting out nose blocks, and that solved the problem. If you're building a Pietenpol and you don't necessarily want to subscribe to exact authenticity, I would suggest the 1/4-inch cap strips and the plywood nose blocks. I mean, it really simplifies things. Or you can do it the other way. It doesn't matter. Personally, I prefer it this way. There's sister. Sissy, what are you doing, girl? Gonna check the place out, See if you can find a mouse. Yeah, it might be over there. Okay, you check it out and you let me know what you find, okay? Alright, carry on. Let's see, where were they? Let's see, where were we? Just, mull it over in your own mind and then make a decision. I do know there's nothing wrong with the 1/4" cap strips. You're going to save a little bit of weight, even with the 1/4" nose blocks, plywood nose blocks. You will overall save maybe half a pound, just guessing, of weight overall on all of your ribs. I know of 5 Pietenpol hybrids still flying, mine included, that go way back. This one 40 years. The other 3 that Bob Rowe built, they're still, well, one is in a garage getting a little tune-up, but he'll have it flying soon. And the one that Ned Kinsinger, 2 that Ned Kinsinger built. One is in a museum up in Kansas, and the other one is, last I heard, was still flying. And at least one of those airplanes has over 500 hours on it. So if you're building a Pietenpol, the only downside that I see is, my gosh, you're violating tradition. You're not a traditionalist. Oh, 30 days in the electric chair, at least. But if you're not quite the purist, if you lean more towards the GN-1 or the GN-1 Pietenpol hybrid, anyway, what I'm doing is I'm making an outline of this particular rib. I'm going to fold it up and I'm going to send it to my friend for his study. And I think he's living in Florida now for his study, for his edification, if he can possibly learn anything from my ramblings and scratchings. This doesn't feel real great on my hand, but the doctor told me that I should try to keep it exercised. He said when it starts hurting, just put it back in the splint. And you can see there where Bob was using a scroll saw, and you can see the waviness of the blade in there. The things we had to contend with back then. That is painful, boys. And we can see here where Bob, on his gussets, had the grain going horizontally like this. And, you know, it really depends on what the designer was trying to achieve with his joints. This is all perfectly well and good. I personally, and I'm not going to get in any argument with anybody, I'm not going to indulge anybody in any senseless arguments. But personally, I like my grain going vertically, and I'm going to tell you why, and then that's going to be the end of it. You look at the way this rib is going to be working with the, and I'll tell you, this is perfectly fine, boys. I mean, this will work from now till kingdom come. But in certain situations, you don't want that joint to have any flexibility like this. So as a designer, an aircraft designer, I would tend to go in there and run my grain going vertically, so that you gain your maximum stiffness there. You get rid of that. But in certain situations, you do want your grain going this way, because you want the flexibility in that particular joint. It all depends on the designer. And like the A&P Mechanics Good Book 4313 will tell you, all it really has to say about gussets is replace the gussets with the grain going in the direction that the designer originally intended. So, you know, you design it to do what you want it to do. And granted, on a rib, it's not going to make any difference. None, which way that grain is going. Unless you used cardboard. Oh, come on. Why use the half-moon shaped gussets? Because they're pretty. That's why I do it. I like them. I like it like that. And there were airplanes back in the 20s, 30s that utilized that kind of a gusset. If you're looking for maximum weight savings, that's not the way to go. Although, you can take out some of that weight with judicious sanding. Oh man, it's time for the brace. Okay, I think that may have it. Oh, and by the way, a lot of you fellows will know what that is. Ambroid cement, the original liquid cement. Most of you guys that built model airplanes back in the 60s, you'll know exactly what that is. And Ambroid is the only glue worth sniffing. Just thought I'd let you know. Not that I sniff Ambroid, but it does smell good. Now we want the grain in the nose block. We want to try to get it, now the way it's situated, you're going to have to kind of compromise just a little bit. But we want it running in this direction if we can. In a perfect situation, the grain would be running this way here and this way here. But as you can see, we've got two different angles. So you cut it out, you compromise it so you get the best of both worlds. So it's going to kind of wind up on a little bit of an angle. So, you know, use your best judgment and it'll come out okay. Mail call. That can get thrown away. Publishers Clearinghouse. Looks like I've won $350 million a day from the Publishers Clearinghouse. Well, boys, I guess I can afford that 180 Skywagon after all. Okay. Back to the drawing. Well, we're almost done with the drawing. Whoops. What did I do there? Okay. Okay, we can get rid of that right there. Ouch. You know, I've been 10 weeks in the cast, and I'm getting better at using my left hand, but not much. Of course, when you're nailing your nails, make sure they're more evenly spaced than what I'm showing. And of course, there's that pesky grain in the gussets that get people so bent out of shape. There we go. You know, I think a lot of that is, you know, it comes from rules of thumb from woodworkers. Now, not a lot of woodworkers use gussets. Old-time boat builders did in certain designs. Gussets were used in various and different sundry building structures, bridges, you know, that kind of stuff. But in airplanes, in building model airplanes, of course, the grain of the wood is, in a lot of instances, it is paramount for the strength of that model. And so your rules of thumb would absolutely hold true. For instance, if you were building flaps for a control line stunt model, you would want the grain of those flaps to go down the length of the flaps for maximum stiffness. But anyway, this is rip gussets, and so, you know, it's not that big of a deal. Well, that's gonna wrap it up. Turned out pretty good. I will fold that up and get it in the mail, probably not this afternoon, but in the morning for sure. Okay, my subscriber friend, you know who you are. I hope this helps you a lot. Take care now.